welcome to your top human rights organization review. I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Today on the show, we're going to look at 5 different human rights organizations, and we'll look at an article from each one of their websites. Now, first we begin with the Human Rights Watch and the Chechen leader's simple strategy to control social media. After that, we will move next to Amnesty International as they call attention to the 1 year on of no justice for election violence in Guinea. Then, Human Rights Foundation demands disclosure of the whereabouts of journalists detained in secret prisons since 2001. And then next, the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, helps spread awareness for World Mental Health Day. And then we'll end the show with the NRC, the Norwegian Refugee Council, as students make their way back to school in war-torn Syria. Now, to begin the show, Human Rights Watch takes us to Chechnya. Now, Ashat Neva, a social worker from a small town in Chechnya, did not speak out against the region's notorious leader, Ramzan Kadyrov. She wouldn't have dared, but instead she made a WhatsApp recording imploring him to look into the plight of ordinary people pushed below the poverty line by local officials, a message that went viral among Chechen users of the messaging app. Now, a week or so later, Aneva found herself hauled into the studio of Grozny TV, the state television and radio broadcaster, her husband beside her, the republic's leader in front of her, being forced to apologize publicly for her quote-unquote lies. "You help the poor. I was confused. I do not know how and why I did that," she said to the president Ramzan Kadyrov, her head bowed. Now, Aneva's husband joined in, chastising himself for allowing her to spread all those lies. Now, the 16-minute news segment sent a clear message to Chechnya's audience. If you're unhappy with something, keep your mouth shut or prepare to be shamed. Now, public humiliation forms part of Kadyrov's latest strategy to eradicate dissent in the republic. Now, for close to a decade, the young leader has been exercising tyrannical rule over Chechnya. A free press no longer exists, and the few journalists from independent Russian and foreign outlets reporting on ongoing abuses inside the republic find themselves at great risk of harassment, arbitrary detentions, and even violent attacks by security officials and their proxies. Now, a recent report by Human Rights Watch described how local authorities retaliate against people who show dissatisfaction with the Chechen leadership and its policies. It found that the onslaught against dissent has intensified over the past 18 months, with even the mildest criticism on social media ruthlessly punished through unlawful punitive detention, enforced disappearances, cruel and degrading treatment, death threats, threats against family members, and physical abuse of family members. Now, this severe and sweeping repression by the local authorities is designed to remind the Chechen public of Kadyrov's total control and to contain the flow of any negative information from Chechnya that could undermine Russia's support. Now, as a result, few people in Chechnya go as far as Aneva. If they do, retribution is fast. So free press has no existence in Chechnya right now, and that is a severe human rights violation, especially for those who are suffering from trying to report and get this information out there. Now, moving on to Amnesty International. Next, Amnesty International calls for justice after a year of silence after election violence. Authorities in Guinea should take concrete and immediate steps to ensure justice for the victims and the families of those who were shot, raped, or beaten during the 2015 presidential election period. Now, Guinea's authorities should ensure that members of the security forces and mobs linked to both the ruling party and opposition groups are held accountable for the killing of 12 people, several rapes, and the looting of several markets in Conakry, the capital, during the election period. Now, to date, no one has been brought to justice in relation to these crimes. A year of inaction is far too long for families who have seen their loved ones taken from them. Victims of last year's electoral violence deserve justice for the harm inflicted upon them, and the authorities should not make them wait any longer, said Francois Patoul, West Africa researcher at Amnesty International. Now, presidential elections were held on October 11, 2015. The result was a first-round victory for Alpha Conde, the incumbent who received 58% of the vote. Now, during the period around the 2015 elections, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch documented several incidents involving the security forces that resulted in the deaths of at least 10 people during demonstrations, most in Conakry. In addition, dozens of people were arbitrarily arrested and tortured. Now, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have separately and jointly documented other violations and abuses committed during the election period, including the beating to death of 2 men and the rape of a woman by mobs linked to the opposition, the sexual abuse of a child by several ruling party supporters, and the extensive looting and destruction of property in markets by mobs associated with the ruling party, at times allegedly and complicitly with the security forces as well. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch sent Guinea's Prosecutor General the details of several cases from the 2015 election period and urged the government to investigate these cases, including several complaints filed by family members and their lawyers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you look at the United States, and when you have a situation between law enforcement and an individual that gets shot and killed by law enforcement, the public wants to see that footage. If there's a dash camera, if there's a body camera on the officer, the public wants to see it. A number of people were killed, several people were raped, and a couple children were abused, along with markets being looted. And a year has gone by and nothing has happened. Absolutely nobody has been arrested. Nobody even wrongly convicted of these crimes. Talk about frustrating. Now, moving on to the Human Rights Foundation. HRF is calling for the whereabouts of journalists detained in secret prisons since 2001. Now, last month marked 15 years since the Eritrean government arbitrarily detained a group of 11 independent journalists in secret prisons, effectively bringing about the end of independent press in the country. Now, Human Rights Foundation joins the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea in calling on the Eritrean government to urgently provide information on the whereabouts of the detainees and to release them immediately. Now, the journalists were arrested in September of 2001 following the publication of an open letter denouncing President Isaias Afwerki's dictatorial rule. Now, the journalists have remained incommunicado since they were first arrested in 2001 without charge or trial. The government has justified their detention by claiming that they posed a threat to national security. Now, a 2012 report by Reporters Without Borders claims that 7 members of the journalists that were detained have died while in detention. Now, the government has refused to disclose any information about their whereabouts or the reported deaths. However, in June 2016, the Eritrean foreign minister stated that all political prisoners are alive and will be tried when the government decides. The ruthless imprisonment of these journalists by the Eritrean government, followed by the regime's refusal to disclose the fate and whereabouts of the detainees for 15 years, qualify as the crime of enforced disappearance according to the 2006 International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, said Celine Asaf Bustani, International Legal Associate at Human Rights Foundation. Although Eritrea is not a state party to this convention, the definitions in the convention codify general international law, so the convention's content is binding upon Eritrea, she added. So after 15 years of being detained without trial, without charges, supposedly 7 of these 11 journalists have died, but according to the government, they're all alive and well and still awaiting trial. So we're going to definitely keep an eye on Eritrea and see if we can get any updates in the near future of the whereabouts of these remaining journalists. Now, next, the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, helps spread awareness for World Mental Health Day. Now, violence can create an environment of chaos, fear, and uncertainty. and severely affect the physical and emotional well-being of individuals, families, and their communities as well. Now, this can leave people and communities overwhelmed and with depleted resources to cope. Now, many in need of help often have little or no access to mental health services and psychosocial support, while others fear the stigma of reaching out for help. Now, fighting in northeast Nigeria has forced millions to flee their homes. Many have seen their relatives and friends killed and the destructions of their communities. Now, young men whose relatives have died as a result of the violence are often left to support themselves and their remaining family members. The psychological consequences of such extreme situations, compounded by the struggle to provide for themselves and their families, have left many young men feeling stigmatized, rejected, and suffering from mental health issues. Nigerian Red Cross volunteers are trained and supported so they can run counseling support groups for these young men as well as other vulnerable people.
Sometimes when I am sleeping, I used to wake up and shout. And when I remember all these things, my heart begins to break. My hand self is shaking. It was on 14 July 2014. They killed a lot of people in our hometown. Even they killed my father and my mother. They slaughtered them. The first day that I heard that they killed my father, I just faint.
We told to them, they expressed all the complaints, all the situation, all the symptoms. Volunteers and field officers listen them. This is the first step. And then they try to analyze and to see how they can help to cope with the situation.
The group is so interesting. I don't want the group to finish. I want the group to be continue to be helping us the way they are helping us.
Now, when you think of refugees, you think when they need help, yes, they need shelter, they need food, they need supplies, they need water. But the one thing you really don't think of is the psychological help that they need as well. Now, to end the show, students make their way back to make their way back to school in war-torn Syria. Now, we've heard a lot about Syria recently in the news, especially between the two presidential candidates in the debate. Now, more than 2 million children inside Syria have dropped out of school because of the war. A community-run center in an unfinished building in Sana'a in rural Damascus is helping some of them back into the classroom. At the House of Love Center, volunteer women from the community come to teach children from across Syria. Some have not been going to school for years, and the women are helping them catch up on their missed education. The center is supported by the Norwegian Refugee Council. Now, some thought the war would last only 1 year and then they would go back to their area. But it continued, and so the education crisis started, says Sahar Al-Hayek, one of the founders of the center. Now, some of them are working and cannot attend formal classes. Children at the age of 13 and 14 are working because they have no other income. Their parents do not work, and this is why they dropped out of school. Now, inside war-torn Syria, every fifth school has been destroyed. In addition to the more than 2 million school children inside Syria who have no school to go to, Syria's neighboring countries are hosting close to 1 million Syrian refugee children who are also out of school. This number is increasing by the day. Now, if we turn our backs on these children, the consequences will be disastrous. More children will be at risk of being recruited as child soldiers, subjected to sexual violence, end up as child laborers, or as child brides. We will rob them of hope for a better future, says Therese Curran, the education advisor for NRC Syria. Now, the Norwegian Refugee Council provides the students with backpacks and teaching materials. They also train teachers and give administrative support to the association. So what a great program there being put on by the NRC, the Norwegian Refugee Council, for all those refugee children in Syria. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for your top human rights organization review. I want to thank you for watching the show. Please go to these human rights organizations' websites to check out all of these articles and more. But make sure you keep watching, there's more shows to come. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I was your host, Bryce Dolan.